Hello, today we're going to be talking about lean doughs and how to make lean doughs. And so I'm going to give you the recipe first, and then I'm going to go over the demonstration. This is one of the recipes that has changed my life. It's one I use all the time. And although it is a yeast dough, and we know it's a yeast dough because it has yeast in it, even though it has yeast in it, this is one of the quickest breads that I know how to make. So remember, it's a yeast bread that is quick to make, but it's still called a yeast because it has that. So what we're going to start off is, I call it my hand dough recipe because if you notice, it's just the shape of my hand, and it helps remember that under my thumb I put in 1 cup of hot water. With this hot water, I want it to be somewhere between 100 and 130 degrees. I don't want it to be more than 130 degrees because it will actually kill my yeast at that point. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we go on. I have 1 tablespoon of sugar. I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of yeast. I do it in that order so that my everything I use yeast with, I have sugar in, but not everything do I have sugar do I want yeast in. So so that way I can use the same tablespoon to get my sugar, then I get my tablespoon of yeast. I can then put in a tablespoon of oil or other fats if I want, that's my choice. And then I add a teaspoon of salt, as we know that enhances flavoring. It also helps develop the structure of the gluten in the bread. And then I'm going to add 2 to 3 cups of flour, a half a cup at a time. So let me demonstrate how to do that. So I'm going to now walk through our recipe. So in my bowl, as I said, I've got 1 cup of hot water. This is just out of the tap. When I go ahead and put this water in, I want you to make sure that you know that it is very important that your water not be more than 130 degrees. Yeast is a little critter that grows, a bacteria that grows just naturally in the air. It also will appear on grapes and other fruits and other kinds of things. That's why how they make wine is they crush the grapes, and the sugar from the inside of the grape mixes with the yeast on the outside of the grapes, and that's what causes, the yeast loves sugar. So because I know that, I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of sugar, and I'm just going to sprinkle that over my water. Yeast comes in packages. You will notice that I tend to buy it in very large packages, like 2 pounds at a time. And I do that because I go through quite a bit of yeast. I like working with yeast. I like the way it smells. I like to work with it. And this is much cheaper. I can buy this 2-pound package of yeast for $3 to $4, where buying just the little tiny ones at the store can be quite expensive. Typically in a packet at the store, it has just under a tablespoon of yeast, so I'm just going to put about a tablespoon of yeast. This can seem like a lot of yeast to some people, but what that does is it's going to help it rise a little bit more quickly. The yeast that we have right now are made to, they're pretty hardy, and they're made to come to life. So what they do is they freeze them, they dry them first, this bacteria, and then they freeze it so that way it will stay air packed, and it will just, like, it's in suspended animation. But what I'm doing right now is the way to bring it back to life is I'm going to add the warm water. As I said, it will die at 130, so I have to keep it less than 130. And then I'm going to add the sugar so that it feeds it, and then I'm going to let the yeast sort of soften up here. If you were at home, you would notice that there is, it's starting to form bubbles around the outside, because yeast is very good at making bubbles. Just like when we eat, we produce gas, so does the yeast. Then I'm going to add a tablespoon of fat. I'm using olive oil here. You can actually use butter, shortening, whatever you would like. And then we've talked before about to measure salt. I'm just going to put in my teaspoon of salt and put that in. Once I have done that, I am going to start adding flour, about a half a cup at a time. I don't know exactly how much it's going to take, but I'm just going to start adding in my flour. And each time I add, I'm just going to keep adding. I'm just going to stir, and what this is doing is the protein in the flour, which we've talked about before, is called gluten. That gluten is going to start building a structure so that it's like it's going to make these little like bubbles, little balloons that will then catch the gas that the yeast is creating, and it's going to start making my bread amazing and elastic. This is a lean dough. Lean dough is the opposite of fat. If I think about a lean person, it's a person who goes to the gym and they work out, they don't eat a lot of fats in their diet, and the same thing is what happens with bread products. So The spectrum of yeast products there's everything from lean doughs, which are like sourdough or French bread that don't have a lot of yeast in them, a lot of fat in them, all the way up to cinnamon rolls and brioche and other kinds of breads that are higher in fat content. So we have, now, the leaner the dough, the meaner it likes to be treated. And what it's doing is you can sort of start seeing it starting to pull this stretchy. And I wanted to get those stretchy because that's to mean I'm developing my gluten. And I'm just going to keep adding, like I said, about a half a cup at a time until it gets to the point where it's very difficult to stir it with my spoon. At that point, I'm going to start kneading it, and I'll show you that process in just a moment. I'm just about to that point. So what I do is I keep stirring it until it just won't, having a hard time getting the flour in using my spoon, and it starts to pull away from my bowl, and I want to get all that goodness off of there. And then once it starts to get to that point, I'm actually going to start kneading it. So I take some more flour, probably a couple tablespoons. I'm pretty generous with it. I don't need a ton, but I want enough so that I have some to work in. So I'm going to be very generous with this. I'm going to pour my dough onto that area right there. And now I'm going to do what's kneading, K-N-E-A-D. When you knead bread, I want you to think of making it, so what I'm doing right now is I'm going to keep my hands as paddles. I'm not going to let my fingers come apart. I'm going to keep them together like little paddles. And I'm just going to lift it up and sort of push it over. And at first I'm going to start off a little bit gentle, almost like it's a bubble that I don't want to pop. And what I'm doing is I'm just trying to take it. I'm only using my fingertips. I'm not using my whole hand because I don't want the dough to turn me into Mrs. Dough Hands. So I'm just going to do this, and I just keep twisting it. I just keep turning it and keep working all this flour. If I have sticky parts, I'm just going to go ahead and put the flour on those sticky parts. And then once it starts getting to the point where it's not so sticky, then I start putting some more pressure on it. And I'm actually going to knead this bread for about 5 minutes. And please notice I just keep my hands as paddles. I lift up, I push in, and then I'm pushing down with the heel of my hand so that I'm getting nice pressure. And this is when you need to remember that cooking is not for wimps, because it takes a little bit of time. So like I said, I'm going to continue to do this for about 5 minutes, and I'll be right back. Okay, now we're back. It's been about 5 minutes and I've been kneading this. You'll notice that it's much smoother. It has a much more even texture, and you want to basically knead it until, some people always have trouble when I say this, but you want it to be soft and warm like a baby's bottom. If you've ever given a baby a bath and they put their hands around you and you sort of like do the little patty on their bottom, that's what we're talking about, because you want it to be soft and like that. Notice it's not sticky anymore, and I've been able to roll it around. Add flour as you need so that it's nice and smooth. Once you have that, and so I have a nice smooth even texture, so I want it to be smooth, elastic, and like I said, soft like a baby's bottom. I'm going to pat it out into a circle about the size of my hand to get all the bubbles out. And then what I'm going to do, now you can, if you want to, you can let this rise first, and what I mean by rise is it's also called proofing. You can allow this to expand and then punch it down and knead it out just a little bit more and let it rise a second time. Or if you want to, you can just pull in the sides like this. I'm just going to allow mine to rise once this time. And then what I do is I turn it over so that the seam is on the back, and I pull that all together. And so I have a nice smooth top. I don't know what that is, so we'll get rid of it. And it has this nice smooth on the top of my loaf. I'm going to be putting this in my pie pan that we have. You can shape it into other loaves if you want, but I like to just put it in. This is my basic loaf, and I just set it in there so it's going to be nice and round. And then you can, if you want to, you can bake it right away. It will be fine. It'll just be more dense. I'm going to let this rise for about an hour, bake it, and I'll show you what it looks like. So I showed you the picture of what it looked like before it went in the oven. It's just come out. It was at 350 for about 40 minutes. You can check it anytime after half an hour. You can also, if you want, because it cooks that long, if you just put it in the oven while the oven is cold and allow it to preheat, you can do that. And then once it's done, you can tell because it's nice and brown on the top, and it also sounds hollow when you thump it. and then when I pull it out, it has this nice brown color on the bottom. So here it is. When you cut bread, you want it so that it is, you want to let it cool before you slice it. And the reason you do that is so that that way it doesn't gum together. Sometimes people, when bread is gummy, they think, oh, it's that it's not done all the way, but it actually isn't. It just hasn't had a chance for the structure to stay together. If you want to, you can glaze this with butter if you want, or just leave it as it is, and it's a nice, like I said, crusty loaf of bread. And this is your basic, and we'll talk about some variations next time.